The Tale of Ratibor. It was in ancient times when wonders still happened in yngliizm. Once upon a time, in one of the blessed cities of Belovodia, there lived a just prince and his princess. Their life could have been happy if, in the summer of their youth, God had granted them children. Doctors and sorcerers came from far and wide, but they were unable to free the princely couple from their infertility. And then, one day, an old hermit sorcerer came to their princely chambers. He gave the princess some barley grains and said, "Dry your tears. Let the princess eat these wonderful grains, and then, after the appropriate time, she will give birth to a beautiful son." And so, one day, an old sorcerer hermit came to their princely chambers. He gave the princess some barley grains and said, "Dry your tears. Let the princess eat these wonderful grains, and then, after the appointed time, she will give birth to a beautiful son. He will be mighty in strength and renowned for his wisdom, and as a gift from me, accept this sacred sword, my prince." The princess did as the sorcerer instructed, and she bore a son. As he grew, none matched him in jewels or wisdom. Upon coming of age, Ratibor sought to explore the world. As the boy grew up, there was no one equal to him, neither in fierce duels nor in wise conversations. For his wisdom, bravery, and strength, the prince named his son Ratibor. When Ratibor came of age, he wanted to see God's world and explore the neighboring lands. He approached his father with a request to let him go on a journey with his friends. When Ratibor grew up, he wanted to see God's world and explore the neighboring lands. He came to his father with a polite request to let him go on a journey with his friends. The prince just shook his head in disapproval. He valued his only son too much to leave him to the whims of fate. But the young man couldn't think of anything else. Therefore, in the end, the prince gave his consent, and Ratibor and his friends and comrades set off on a journey. And along with him went 3 companions, a weaponsmith, a blacksmith, and an architect. They set off in the direction of the sun, past the Burdock Mountains, and after covering a short distance, the 4 friends arrived at the walls of a beautiful but deserted ancient city that was falling into decay. They saw tall towers, vast bazaars, shops full of goods. Everything pointed to a large and prosperous population, but there wasn't a single person in the towers or on the streets. The amazed travelers didn't understand what was going on until the weaponsmith suddenly slapped his forehead. I remembered, this must be the very ancient city that my great-grandfather told me about. In this ancient city, a dark undead presence has settled, which does not allow any of the inhabitants to rest. It's best for us to get out of here while it's still light. Not so fast, the young prince replied. We won't leave until we've had something to eat, because I'm really hungry. They headed to the shops and picked out everything they needed for the meal. They left a fair payment for the goods on the counters, as if the sellers were present. Then they reached the prince's chambers, in the middle of the ancient city. The weaponsmith set to work preparing the meal, while the others continued to explore the ancient city. The weaponsmith was making good progress, and soon the kitchen was filled with the delicious aroma of the prepared food. As the weaponsmith anticipated how tasty their meal would be, he suddenly noticed a small figure, about the size of a household spirit, clad in armor and holding a sword and a spear. A little man was riding on a black dog, adorned with a bright saddle. "Give me back my meal." The weaponsmith, anticipating how delicious their meal would be, suddenly noticed a small figure in front of him, about the size of a household spirit, clad in armor with a sword and a spear in hand. The little man was riding on a black dog, adorned with a bright saddle. "Give me back my meal," he shouted, shaking his little spear furiously. "Your meal!" "Give me back my meal," he shouted, shaking his little spear furiously. "Your meal," the weaponsmith laughed. I see you're quite the joker, uncle. Turn around faster, shouted the tiny warrior in a loud voice, or I'll turn you into a wooden statue. You little brat, the valiant weaponsmith replied angrily. You are so impudent. The valiant weaponsmith got angry. Come closer so I can fight you like two proper duelists. At these words, the little man suddenly transformed into a terrifyingly tall, dark undead. But the gunsmith's courage did not disappear, for he was born in Belovodia. He charged at the undead, but it turned him into a statue and carried him to the cellar. I'll show them, it grumbled. But the dark undead didn't fight him. Instead, it looked at him with its black eye and turned the weaponsmith into a wooden statue. The dark undead carried him to the cellar and left him there. I'll show them how to feast in my halls, the dark undead grumbled, devouring pies and stewed meat. She picked up the last pieces and then disappeared. Soon the prince's son returned with his friends. Hungry, as if after a long hunt, they shouted from the doorway, "Come on, dear weaponsmith, where are you and where's our meal?" However, their friend couldn't respond from the cellar because he had been turned into a wooden statue. "Maybe he's already full and sleeping somewhere," said the blacksmith. "We need to search for him in the cellars and storerooms." "What a pity," exclaimed the prince's son. "We'll have to make something else. Come on, blacksmith, cook us some lunch, and we'll wander around the ancient city a bit more with my daughter." Now, the same thing happened to the blacksmith. As soon as he started sniffing the appetizing aroma, anticipating the delicious pies and meat, a little warrior appeared before him. At first, the blacksmith bravely challenged the little man to a duel, but in just a moment, he was turned into a wooden statue. The same thing happened to him as it did to the weaponsmith. The dark undead carried the wooden statue of the blacksmith to the cellar and left it there next to the enchanted weaponsmith. Of course, when the prince and the architect, hungry, returned to the prince's chambers, they were again unable to dine. Now the architect was left to cook, but he too couldn't resist the dark undead's magic, just like his friends. When the hungry Ratibor returned to the prince's chambers, he found neither food nor friends. He had to take it upon himself to prepare the meal. As soon as the aroma of the food spread through the prince's chambers, a tiny warrior immediately appeared riding on a dog. "I swear you look wonderful, my friend," said the prince in a patronizing tone. "What do you want?" "Give me my meal," squeaked the little man. "This is not your meal," the uninvited guest replied. "This is my food," said Ratibor. "However, if you insist, we can settle our dispute with a duel." The dog warrior began to grow and transformed into a gigantic dark undead creature. She wanted to scare Ratibor with her terrifying appearance so that he would fall to his knees and beg for mercy. But instead of falling to his knees and begging for mercy, the prince laughed. "A wretched creature, there must be moderation in everything. Just now, I saw a ridiculously tiny little man, and now I'm looking at a foolishly large dark undead. I hope you'll show some real character, and since changing comes easily to you, you'll become my height. No more, no less. So let's settle this with axes and see who truly owns the meal." The dark undead couldn't argue with the prince, so she shrank down to her normal size and lunged at the daring young man with a spear at the ready. But despite the fact that the dark creature was skilled with a sword and spear, Ratibor didn't give an inch. After the terrible battle, he pierced the dark undead with his sharp sword. Figuring out what events had taken place here earlier, he began to search through all the crawl spaces and attics. In a distant crawl space, he discovered 3 of his friends turned into wooden statues. Ratibor touched the wooden statues with his cherished sword, and his friends regained their former appearance. In a distant crawl space, he discovered 3 of his friends, turned into wooden statues. Ratibor touched the statues, restoring his friends. He smiled. I killed the dark undead." He said to them with a kind smile, "Hey warriors, let's go feast." I killed the wretched creature, the hated dark undead. They thanked Ratibor and praised their friend's bravery. He asked them to recognize the armorer as their ruler and to give him a bride from a worthy lineage. Then Ratibor sent word to the residents of the ancient city who had been driven out by the wicked dark undead that they could return to their homes and live in peace and tranquility. He asked them to recognize the armorer as the ruler of the ancient city and to give him the most beautiful girl from a worthy ancient lineage as his wife. The townspeople gladly agreed and spread the glory of Ratibor's victory over the dark undead throughout all the cities and villages of their land. When the wedding celebrations were over and the prince and his friends were getting ready to move on to see God's world and explore neighboring lands, the armorer began to earnestly plead with Ratibor to let him join them. However, Ratibor declined his request, instructing him to wisely govern the ancient city. As a farewell, he handed the armorer a stalk of barley. After instructing him to keep a close eye on it, Ratibor explained, "If the barley grows well, then everything is fine with me. But if the ear of barley droops, know that misfortune has befallen me, and I urgently need your help." After bidding farewell to the newlyweds, the prince and his friends set off again. Did they take a long time or a short time to reach yet another abandoned ancient city? Just like last time, they wandered through the spacious halls, empty streets, and abandoned shops, not encountering a single person. Suddenly, the armorer said, "I finally remembered. There's a terrible evil spirit living in this ancient city that kills everyone it encounters. It's best for us to leave this place." "Only after we have lunch," replied the hungry prince. They picked the necessary supplies from the empty shops, paying fully for everything. In fact, they had to just leave the money on the counters, as the owners were nowhere to be seen. The armorer went to prepare food in the prince's chambers, while Ratibor and Xochi continued their stroll through the ancient city. As soon as the prepared meal began to emit a delicious aroma, a wicked spirit suddenly appeared in the kitchen, taking the form of a repulsive old woman with black wrinkled skin and legs twisted backward. At the sight of such a repulsive spectacle, the valiant armorer, without saying a word, rushed to the door for his sword and attacked the evil spirit in the form of the hideous old woman. But she threw a handful of magical powder at him, and the armorer turned into a stone statue. The evil spirit hid him in one of the rooms, locking it with a bolt. This evil spawn of the world of Navi quickly devoured the meal and vanished. And when Ratibor and Xochi returned to the prince's chambers, hungry, they found neither their meal nor their friend the armorer. Then the prince entrusted the architect with the kitchen duties and went off again to admire the beauties of the ancient city. But the same misfortune happened to the second cook as it did to the first. As soon as the evil spirit appeared, the architect drew his sword and attacked the evil spirit in the form of a repulsive hunchback with legs twisted backward. But the wicked spawn of the world of Navi threw a handful of magical powder at the architect, and he turned into a stone statue. The evil spirit hid him in the same room as the armorer, locking it with a bolt. But the evil spawn of the world of Navi threw a handful of magical powder at the architect, and he turned into a stone statue. The evil spirit hid him in the same room as the armorer, locking it with a bolt. The repulsive hunchback quickly devoured the meal and vanished. "Things are bad," exclaimed the returning prince when he couldn't find his friends, let alone the meal. He took matters into his own hands. As soon as the smell of perfectly cooked food began to waft, an evil spirit immediately appeared. However, this time, dealing with a handsome young man, the evil spirit changed its form and transformed from a hideous hunchback into a charming girl. Ratibor saw the twisted legs and said, "Change form." Seeing the backward twisted legs of the beauty, he immediately realized who was before him. And he said, clutching a sharp sword in his hand, "I ask you, Navya creation, change your appearance once more. I wouldn't want to kill such a charming girl." The evil spirit even squealed with joy, but as soon as he took on his usual ugly appearance of a disgusting hunchback, the prince struck with his treasured sword, and the vile creature Miranavi fell dead at his feet. Realizing what events had unfolded here earlier, he began to search through all the rooms. In one of the distant rooms, he found his friends, turned into stone statues. Ratibor touched the stone statues with the treasured sword, and his friends and comrades regained their former appearance. He said to them with a smile, "Hey warriors, let's go have lunch. I killed the evil spirit." They thanked Ratibor for saving them. Ratibor informed the ancient city's residents that they could return home and asked them to recognize the blacksmith. Then Ratibor sent word to the residents of the ancient city who had been driven out by the evil spirit that they could return to their homes. He promised a peaceful and calm life, and also asked the residents to recognize the blacksmith as their prince and ruler of this ancient city, and to give him the most beautiful girl from some worthy ancient lineage as his wife. The townspeople gladly agreed and spread the glory of Ratibor's victory over the evil spirit throughout all the cities and villages of their land. After the wedding celebrations, the young prince and the architect set off, while Prince Koval was very reluctant to part with his friends, but Ratibor handed him a barley stalk, saying, "Water it and take good care of it. As long as it grows well, be sure that I am content and happy. But if it wilts, it means I'm in trouble, and I'll be waiting for your help. As long as it grows well, be sure that I am content and happy. But if it wilts, it means I'm in trouble, and I'll be waiting for your help." After not traveling too far, the young prince and Zoshi reached the great city by the sea, where they decided to stop for a rest. Fate had it that Zoki fell in love with the most beautiful girl, whose beauty overshadowed the moon and the stars. He sighed, remembering with happiness the lot of a gunsmith and farrier. The servant dreamed. Ratibor pitied him, invited elders, and asked them to make the architect prince. To avoid troubles, the elders agreed. He invited the elders of this coastal city to him, revealed his name, and asked them to recognize the architect as the prince of the city, giving him his chosen one as a wife. To protect themselves from possible future troubles and to secure the help of the brave knight, the elders of this city fulfilled his request, for Ratibor's fame was ringing out everywhere. After the lavish wedding of the architect and his chosen one, the young prince set off alone once again, just as before, leaving behind the barley stalk that could be used to learn about his affairs. After a long journey, the young prince stopped to rest by the riverbank. Suddenly, he was amazed to see a huge yacht floating down the river. Then yet another one floated past him, shimmering with a scarlet light. Each stone was larger than the last, struck by such a wonder. The young prince decided to find their source. For 3 days and 3 nights, he traveled upstream along the river, where the current kept bringing more and more yachts, until he finally saw beautiful marble halls right at the water's edge. Lush gardens surrounded the walls, and on the branches of a sprawling tree hung a golden basket. What the young prince saw in her shook him more than all the wonders he had seen before. In the basket lay the severed head of the most enchanting, most beautiful, most perfect girl in the world. Her eyes were closed, her golden hair tangled by the wind, and every minute a drop of scarlet blood fell from the wound on her throat into the water, immediately transforming into a huge yacht. Ratibor could not bear to witness this heart-wrenching scene. A drop of scarlet blood immediately transformed into a huge yacht. Ratibor couldn't bear to watch this heart-wrenching scene. Tears streamed from his eyes. He decided to search the marble halls to uncover the terrible secret. He walked through the richly decorated marble halls, through the carved galleries and wide corridors, but he didn't encounter a single living being anywhere. Finally, he reached the chamber draped in silver silk, where on the satin bed lay the decapitated body of the beautiful girl. He immediately realized that it was her head that was in the golden basket, consumed by an irresistible desire to unite both parts of the beautiful being into one. He rushed back to the exit and soon returned with the basket in his hands. He carefully placed the head against the neck, and suddenly, the severed parts fused together. He touched her body with his sacred sword, and the girl came to life. Joyful and excited, the young prince began to implore the stranger to tell him about herself, how and why she ended up in these mysterious marble halls, and why her head had been severed. "I am Princess Darina," the girl replied. "The wicked necromancer fell in love with me and kidnapped me using magic. Since he is terribly jealous, whenever he leaves his marble halls, he always cuts off my head and hangs it in a golden basket." Filled with compassion, Ratibor urged the princess to leave these marble halls with him immediately. "First, we need to get rid of the undead, the shapeshifter," the girl said. "Otherwise we won't be able to escape from the chase. I will try to find out where his death is hidden. You'll have to sever my head and place it back in the golden basket, so that the cruel undead shapeshifter doesn't suspect anything." The poor young prince couldn't even imagine how he would carry out such a terrible task. However, there was no choice. Squeezing his eyes shut, he severed the head of his beloved Dorina with one strike of the sharp, fateful sword. After that, he hung the basket back in its place and hid in the closet near the bedroom. Soon, the undead shapeshifter returned. Having revived the princess, he angrily shouted, "Ugh! It smells of Russian spirit in my marble halls." Darina pretended to cry, saying, "I know nothing, undead shapeshifter. While you are away, I see nothing, feel nothing. It seems you flew to Ros or Belovodia, and there you picked up the Russian spirit. But if you don't believe me, undead shapeshifter, then you might as well kill me, just don't shout. It seems you flew to Ros or Belovodia, and there you picked up the Russian spirit. But if you don't believe me, undead werewolf, then better kill me, just don't scream." The undead werewolf, who loved his golden-haired captive to the point of madness, swore that he would rather die himself than kill her. "That would be terrible. If you die far away, I will stay with my head, not alive or dead." "Don't worry, Darina," the undead shapeshifter comforted her. "No one will kill me. My life key is hidden. I hope that's true." "Don't be afraid, beautiful Darina," the undead shapeshifter began to comfort her. "It's unlikely that anyone will kill me, as the key to my life is hidden in a secret place." "I hope that's true," the princess said, "but maybe you made all this up to comfort me. I won't be at peace until I hear more about this place and can assess its safety myself." At first, the undead shapeshifter refused to reveal his secret, but Princess Darina was so cunningly affectionate towards him, so tender in her care, that the undead shapeshifter, additionally terribly tired and wanting to sleep, finally spoke up. "No one will be able to kill me, except for Prince Ratibor from Belovodia, and he won't be able to do that until he finds the solitary black tree, which is guarded day and night by a black dog and a black horse. After that, you need to pass by the black guards unharmed. Climb up the black tree to the highest branch, where the golden cage hangs, pull out the singing starling from there, extract the bumblebee from its body, and crush it. Only then will I die. Do you see how securely my life is protected? After all, you need to have a truly brave heart and immense wisdom to reach the black tree and overcome its black guardians." "But how can they be defeated?" insisted the princess. "Tell me, I will calm down with the axes." The undead shapeshifter, who had already dozed off and was tired of the endless questions, replied through his drowsiness. In front of the black horse lies a pile of bones, and in front of the black dog a bundle of grass. If you move those piles with a long stick so that the black horse gets the grass and the black dog gets the bones, then it won't be hard to pass between them. The prince, who had heard the entire story, immediately set off in search of it. Soon he saw a solitary black tree, which was vigilantly guarded by a wild black horse and a fierce black dog. However, after receiving their food, the black guardians became docile and meek. Ratibor easily climbed the black tree, caught the starling, and twisted its neck. The undead shapeshifter, now fully awake, realized what was happening and took to the air to fight for his life. However, the prince noticed the enemy from afar. Ratibor quickly disabled the shapeshifter by destroying the bumblebee inside the bird, ending its life. When the enemy was already approaching the black tree, Ratibor tore the wings off the insect, and the undead shapeshifter immediately fell to the damp ground. The prince tore off the bumblebee's legs, leaving the undead shapeshifter crippled, and when the bumblebee lost its head, the life of the evil undead shapeshifter came to an end. Ratibor returned to the undead with victory. He wanted to immediately head to her father's principality to ask for his blessing on a family union with Darina. But the girl begged him to stay for a little while to rest and take in all the wealth of the marble halls. Once the princess went to bathe in the river. When she washed her hair and combed her beautiful golden locks, a few long strands got tangled in the comb, sparkling and shimmering with red gold. Proud of her beautiful hair, Darina thought, "I can't just throw it into the river where it will get stuck in the dirty river mud." With that thought, she placed the golden strands on a leaf of the oak tree and set the green little boat afloat on the water. It so happened that the prince of the great southern capital, located downstream, was rowing in a boat. From its side, he suddenly noticed something sparkling on the water, like a sunbeam. As they paddled closer, his rowers pulled out the green leaf of the oak tree, on which the golden strands shimmered like fire. The prince had never encountered such beauty before. He vowed not to rest either night or day, until he finds the owner of those golden strands. To aid in his search, he summoned the 3 wisest and most powerful witches from his principality. The first wise witch said, "If the owner of the golden hair lives on the earth, then I promise to find her." The second wise witch said, "Even if she lives in the heavens, I will make a hole in the sky to bring her to you, bright prince." And the third wise witch laughed and replied, "If you tear the heavens apart, then I will have to patch the hole in such a way that no one can tell the old piece from the new one." The prince considered the last witch to be the wisest of them all, and it was she who was entrusted with the search for the beautiful stranger with the shining golden hair. For this task, he gave his large princely boat along with his retinue. The witch quickly realized that the owner of the golden hair had to be sought in the neighboring principality upstream. So she settled into the large princely boat, and the prince's warriors began to row with all their might against the current. They sailed for several days until the marble halls appeared in the distance. The cunning witch ordered to hide the boat in the willows by the nearest island, while she herself set off to the marble halls in a boat. The treacherous witch stepped onto the shore, reached the steps of the marble hall, and began to weep and lament her fate. That day Ratibor went hunting, while the golden-haired princess sat at home all alone. The kind soul immediately responded to the tears of the old woman. "Mother," Darina asked as she stepped out of the marble halls, "why are you crying?" "My daughter," the cunning woman replied, "I mourn the sorrowful fate that may befall you if your husband perishes, and you are left here all alone." And I should mention that with the help of her magic, she had already learned about Prince Ratibor. "It's the absolute truth," the princess exclaimed, clapping her hands. "That would be terrible. Why didn't I think of this earlier?" All day long Darina cried, and in the evening she told Ratibor about her fears. But he just laughed, saying that the key to his life was in a safe place, and it was unlikely that misfortune could threaten them. The princess calmed down. She asked to be shown the place where the key was hidden, so she could keep an eye on it. Darina, the key is in my sharp, fateful sword, which knows no defeats. If it gets ruined, then I will die, Ratibor replied. But in an honest fight, no one can defeat me. So calm your heart, dear princess. It would be wiser to keep the fateful sword at home when going hunting, suggested his wife. And although the young prince assured her that there was no reason to worry, Darina decided to do things her own way. The next morning, when Ratibor went out hunting again, the princess hid his mighty sharp sword, replacing it with another one in its sheath, so that the young prince noticed nothing. So, when the witch came again to weep on the marble steps, the princess cheerfully said, "Don't cry, mother. Today my husband is safe. The key to his life is hidden in the sacred sword, and the sword is tucked away in my chest." The old witch waited until after the afternoon nap, when everything was quiet, stole the sacred sword from the chest, kindled a fire, and thrust the sharp blade into the blazing coals. As soon as the blade began to heat up, Ratibor felt a terrible heat throughout his body. Knowing the magical properties of his treasured sword, he pulled the weapon out of his sheath to see what had happened. But alas, in his hands was not the real sacred sword but a fake. He shouted loudly, "What have you done, Darina? I am doomed," and he spurred his horse into a gallop. But the cunning witch stirred up such a strong fire that the sword quickly heated up to a bright red. Ratibor was almost near the marble halls, but then the rivet broke, the handle came off the blade, and in that very moment the prince's head rolled to the ground. The witch sorceress entered the princess's chamber with axes. "My daughter," she said, "how tangled your wonderful golden hair is after your sleep. Until your husband returns, let me wash your hair and style it." They walked down the marble steps to the river. The deceitful witch said, "Get into my boat, darling. The water on the other side is cleaner than by the shore." Darina began to wash her hair, which seemed to cover her like a veil, closing her eyes and making it hard to see around. At that moment, the old witch untied the boat, and the current carried them downstream, towards the hidden princely barge by the island. As soon as the boat came alongside the barge, the prince's warriors from southern city lifted the princess and the witch on board. The princess cried in vain and begged to be let back to her husband Ratibor. But it was all in vain. At the feast, Darina held a grand dinner. "Oh, you shameless old witch sorceress!" She turned to the deceiver with anger. "I realize that you are dragging me to the chambers of some prince. Whoever he may be, I swear I won't see his face for a whole 16 years. Finally, they arrived in the southern capital to the delight of the prince. But when he learned of the golden-haired princess's vow, he built a tall tower for her. Nothing was to disturb her solitude. Only those chopping wood and drawing water were allowed to enter the courtyard surrounding the tower. Nothing was to disturb her solitude. Only those chopping wood and drawing water were allowed to enter the courtyard surrounding the tower. And so she lived mourning her beloved. I must tell you that as soon as the head of Prince Ratibor was severed from his body, the barley stalk left with the armorer suddenly broke, causing the ear to fall to the ground. The loyal armorer was terribly alarmed. He immediately realized that something bad had happened to his dear friend. Without hesitation, he gathered his warriors and set off to help. On the way, he met the warriors of the smith and the architect. After talking to each other, the friends concluded that all 3 ears of grain had broken off at the same moment. They had to prepare for the worst, so they weren't even surprised when, after a long journey, they found the charred, blistered body of the young prince on the riverbank, with his head lying nearby. Knowing about the sword, they rushed to Ratibor's weapons. They carried Ratibor's body and discovered the real sword in ashes. It was then that their hearts froze with grief as they carried Ratibor's body to the marble halls to wash it and prepare for the mourning ritual. But suddenly, they saw the real fabled sword lying in a pile of ash. The blade was overheated and covered in shells. The hilt of the sword lay off to the side, the rivet was lost. "We will fix everything now," shouted Prince Koval. He fanned the flames, forged the rivet, and attached the hilt to the blade. As soon as he finished his work, the young prince's head reattached to his neck, just as firmly as before. "Now it's my turn," exclaimed the prince armorer, and he spun the grinding wheel so hard that the shells and stains vanished from the blade as if by magic. The fabled sword became shiny again, and while he was turning the wheel, the scars and burns disappeared from Ratibor's body. He suddenly came to life and sat up on his bed, just as beautiful as before. "Where is my wife Darina?" That was his first question. He told his friends everything that had happened. "Now it's my turn to act," declared Prince Doichi. "Give me your fabled sword, and I'll quickly bring your wife back to you." So, with the shining cherished sword in hand, he set off in search of the missing princess. Soon he reached the southern capital, where he saw the tall tower. The townspeople told him that there, far away from everyone, lives the golden-haired princess from the northern country. No one is allowed to enter the tower courtyard except for woodcutters and water carriers. Zochi decided that this must be his friend Ratibor's wife. He disguised and shouted, "Wood, wood, 100 golden hryvnias for a bundle." The princess sent a maid to ask why the wood was costly. "Just firewood, but cut with a sharp sword." The princess, who was breathing in the fresh air on the roof, sent a maid to ask what kind of wood was so expensive. "It's just firewood," replied the fake woodcutter, "but it was cut down with a sharp shining sword." Hearing this, the princess's heart began to race. "It's just firewood," replied the fake woodcutter, "but it was cut down with a sharp shining sword." At such an answer, the princess's heart began to race. Looking out the window, she saw the cherished sword of Prince Ratibor in the stranger's hand. So she sent the maid again to ask if the woodcutter had any other goods for sale. He replied that he had a wonderful flying chariot. The princess will be able to take a look at it when she goes for an evening stroll in the garden. She agreed. In the evening, Zochi brought the flying chariot to the garden and offered the princess a chance to try it out in flight. But at that time, the sister of the prince of the southern capital was walking in the garden. She decided not to let the captive go alone. Together with the old witch who had kidnapped the princess, they also climbed into the flying chariot. The architect clung to the outside, and the flying chariot, like a bird, began to rise quickly, higher and higher. "Enough, enough, it's time to go down," shouted the sister of the prince of the southern capital. At that moment, Zochi grabbed her by the waist and threw her down, right into the river. The prince's sister, all in wet clothes, climbed out of the river and ran to tell her brother what had happened. And when the flying chariot flew over the tower, Zochi threw the old witch out, who shattered against the rocks, and the flying chariot flew straight to the marble halls, where Prince Ratibor was eagerly waiting for them. With tears of joy in his eyes, he met his dear wife. Then, together with his friends, Prince Ratibor went to the lands of Dorina's father, and only after receiving his blessing did Ratibor decide to return to his native Belovodie. When the Prince of Belovodie, who had aged considerably since his son's departure, saw 3 formidable armies approaching his city, he took them for enemies. He rode out to meet them at the head of his squad and said, "If you have come with bad thoughts, then you will not receive any riches in this city. Many of you will only find your death from our swords at the walls of the city. Though I am old, I can still fight. And if my dear brave son Ratibor were with me, all the enemy forces would have fallen before our city. But he left us many years ago, and no one has heard from him since." At that moment, the prince threw himself around his father's neck, telling him everything that had happened, and how his old loyal friends, the armorer, the blacksmith, and the architect, had helped him. Their adventures sparked universal admiration, Ratibor told his father about his wife Dorina and that he had received her father's blessing. And when the old prince saw his son's golden-haired wife, his joy knew no bounds, and he decided to throw a grand wedding for him. In 3 days, all the people living within 300 versts gathered for the wedding. The old wolf Vachilnik came, the one who gifted the cherished sword to Ratibor. He blessed the family union of Ratibor and the golden-haired princess Dorina and was honored as the appointed father. At the wedding feast, there were all sorts of dishes that no one had ever tasted before. After the wedding, the old prince announced that he was retiring. Then the people came together and chose Ratibor as the new prince. And so it was, and everyone lived long and happily. Comments on Chitu Paru. Kenyaje, an old form of addressing a prince. In the clearings, in the sacred places where duels and competitions were held, following the sun, that is, in the direction of the western direction and beyond, the Riphean mountains, the Ural mountains, black undead, unclean force, demon, devil, or evil spirit. Let's have a meal, whether it's lunch or dinner. The domovoi is a kind spirit, the guardian of the household. According to folk beliefs, it is said that the domovoi is about a small height of around an ashen, 71.12 centimeters. A Navi creature, that is, a being from the other world, the world of Navi, in the Axis back then at that time. The bedchamber is a bedroom, a place for rest. Loji, here it means a bed, a place to sleep. The black tree is a black poplar. The tree of Perun is an oak. To lament means to complain. Nagalishchi skabard.